Cool.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Um, this is not meant to be like super formal or anything, but we do have a lot of information, so we might like kind of go quickly through it. And we'll make sure that at least one of us sticks around for any questions or discussion afterwards, but we're going to try to also get like other people training. So we might just divide and conquer when we get to that point. We're also going to divide and conquer these topics, so we'll kind of just hop back and forth and talk through them.
We did not discuss any of that, so it'll be all over the place. But I just want to reiterate that almost everything we're going to go over today are things that you already are doing and already know. It's just like a kind of reiteration and hopefully a way to better support you all when hard topics come up and how you can gracefully deal with them without hurting any feelings, stuff like that.
Yeah, so although this was precipitated by our, I don't even want to say revision, like new application of the existing weight policies, it's not specifically related to weight conversations or anything that has to do with a person's body size or shape. These are all things that apply to everything that also might be good tools to have in difficult situations that where weight applies. You all have already read the mashup, so I'm not going to go over too much in detail the actual policy. We'll also go over it at our staff meeting in June. And then after that staff meeting is when all of these changes will officially take place. Although, again, they aren't really changes. They're like ways to apply it that is more up to date and more respectful based on our current understanding of how to be inclusive. And so these things already exist in our policies. They're not new. So on top of safety, which is, of course, our top priority, inclusion is also a huge one. And so that's why we've taken a huge amount of time to try to work through how to do this best. And you guys have already read what the actual policy is, so I'm not going to go through that unless you have any questions that are quick at the moment.
Great.
Okay, good. You guys are all team leads, so that's great. These things might apply differently to people who pull lines for a short period of time versus a team lead, but all of this will be applicable to you, so that's great. Cool. So we're going to talk about some curriculum guidance and curriculum modifications that can help in all situations. Yeah. Do you have anything to add from what I've talked about so far, Rachel?
No, I think you covered all the things. Yeah, we can move on to curriculum.
Okay. So there are ways that the curriculum that we have is meant to give a framework so that we can have consistency, and especially because we have multiple instructors working with the same students, that consistency becomes more important. It's not meant to be like the only right way to teach flying trapeze. But also having a curriculum is a great way to avoid the impacts of implicit bias, because if everyone has the same expectations and the same guidelines of moving through skills, then there aren't possibilities that you might be really excited because the student has like all this potential, so like they don't need to do all that nonsense at the beginning. They can just like do this thing at the end. That might make someone else feel like they're being singled out. So that's another advantage of having that curriculum. But how people move through it and the ways that it applies to different people can vary. So there are a lot of opportunities to really individualize within what we're at. And what we talk about in general training and like what you learned before you became a team lead is kind of the most typical progression, I would say, and the most typical way that progression applies. And we don't always go over ways that we might vary it or ways that we might individualize it, but we do encourage you to always have that in mind. And I know that you guys already do this, like Rachel said, this is not like news to you. You know that this is what's happening.
Yeah, and then just like on top of that, I think you were probably going to cover this, Kirsten, but just the importance of like making sure you are celebrating everybody's wins in any way that you can, which again, I have noticed all of you do that, but just knowing that maybe not everybody's goal is to catch the knee hang on the first turn, maybe, or the first time they're here. Maybe it's, oh, you actually kept your legs together on that swing. That was like exactly what I asked you to do. That was great. And just setting like some expectations that are realistic for all the students that you have here.
So more specifics there, I think, again, something that many of us are already doing. If you present all the pieces of tricks and skills as options and continue that framework throughout class, so that it's not a presentation of, okay, everyone's going to try a knee hang and backflip today, but the first skill we're doing is we're climbing a ladder up way higher than you may have ever climbed a ladder in your whole life. And then like the takeoff is a big accomplishment for many people, or swinging might be a big accomplishment. So making sure that that framing is there from the beginning so people have those opportunities for success. And that applies to things other than a knee hang, but I just use that as like an example that's pretty straightforward. Like Rachel said, there's no set expectation of what is achieved in a first class, although we do always try to encourage our students to push their boundaries. So this doesn't mean that if they're saying that feels a little scary, then automatically they're not going to ever do that. But being able to allow people to take it at their own pace can be really helpful. I think also a way to frame this when you have students who maybe aren't the most typical in their progression through whatever they're doing, whether it's first class or something else, I think it's important that you determine internal guidelines or expectations of what makes you feel comfortable with a student taking the next step in their turn. So if all the steps of the knee hang backflip are an example, then maybe your guideline is that you want someone to be able to jump off the board and have their legs together before you would like them to turn upside down. That's one example. That doesn't have to be your guideline. But that helps with a framework of being consistent. Or maybe you want them to respond to a verbal cue that you give, obviously in the air, before you're comfortable with them going upside down. Whether that's like wiggle your toes or put your legs together or whatever, but you have to know that you guys are connected before you're comfortable with them going upside down. And that can be something that you apply across the board, including times when you might have students where you feel a little bit more nervous about your ability to keep them safe when they are upside down. And students who aren't connected to you and listening to you, actually, it might be difficult to keep them safe when they're upside down, right? So having that framework in your mind so that you don't have to be sitting there like, this person looks scary and they're making me nervous and that's why I don't want them to progress. If you can give them something really concrete, then that can help avoid bias and help to frame that. And it's totally fine if it takes them 3 turns before they do that, or 7 turns or whatever. It's totally fine. And it's actually great. They're doing a lot of really great things up there. And again, this applies to any tricks. Anything else to add to that, Rachel?
Mm-mm.
Cool. Yeah. So I think having for yourself expectations and then being able to communicate them, because sometimes people might want to do things that you don't yet feel comfortable with, and that's totally up to you. You are 100% in charge of every student's journey while they are in your class. And it's not just something that's available to you, but it's actually your responsibility to be guiding them through a journey that is well appointed for them. So being able to have this framework in your head and being able to communicate to them, especially if they're the type of person who's eager to do the next thing or who might notice that like they're not at the same point as someone else. I think we do a lot of good framing in general of like, this is an individualized experience and you're not the same as everyone else and we're not comparing anyone else and all of that. But it's also just like an emotionally charged experience for everyone. So it can be hard for them to see that someone else is doing something that they really want to do that they can't yet.
Yeah. Generally, I just feel like communication is probably the most important thing for your curriculum and what your expectations are for the class. So as long as everybody knows what you're expecting from them, then I guess they can still get mad at you, but it's the way it is.
They might, but we all have feelings while we're doing flying trapeze, so it happens. Do you want me to keep going with class structure modifications?
Yeah, let's go for it, because we don't have a lot on that.
Okay. Some specific ways you might modify the structure of a class. And this is something that we don't really talk about in training, but you're welcome to change the rotations if there's a reason that makes sense for the class you're in. So things like if you want to have a different person on board for a particular student's first turn so that you can help them to get a strong takeoff that will then make it easier for everyone to feel comfortable having them on board. That's something you could build into the way you have the class structured. Generally, instructor rotations that are amended. Something that we do often is like team leads staying on the ground rather than taking a board rotation. Most frequently, I think we do that when there are like tricks that someone else is not able to pull for, but you can also do it for any other reason that makes sense in class. And that's something to just kind of keep in your back pocket, along with any other creative modifications. That is available. and that can be really valuable.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in the board worker thing, right? About like assisting, double assisting,
yes.
stuff like that.
Yeah, there'll be like specific skills that board workers can use on the board to be more comfortable working with any student. And then also, I think we're talking later, if a board worker has like a concern about working with a certain student, there are many things you can do to help support them, but one of them could be to adjust so that maybe like on the first turn, the catcher's up there instead, and after that, then that person is likely to have maybe a smoother takeoff once they've experienced it once, and the board worker might feel more comfortable at that point. If you are modifying, I always recommend making sure you communicate with everyone who's impacted, like the other staff members on the class, just so they know what's happening. And you can't always do that because sometimes it's like a last minute decision because you don't realize until they're already up on the board that you'd like to modify. That's totally fine, but just keeping the communication in mind if it's available. Great. Ready to move on?
Yep. Okay, I could talk about this one because it's probably the one that you all have questions about the most anyway, which is how to respectfully deny participation, which I just want to say, I've never had to deny any participation. I haven't heard of a lot of people here having to, so I really don't think this situation is going to come up like really ever, but just to like ease your minds and everything, there are a few things that we can do to help people feel a little bit better because nobody wants to be told that they can't participate in class. Just a reminder that if you deny somebody participation, they are of course going to get a refund. So make sure that they know that. And that's all you need to tell them. They can go to the office. The office can help them with all of that stuff. At this point, when you're denying participation, like you've already been speaking with them and like have a good communication with them. So this isn't like they walk through the door and you're like, no, not you. go back. So hopefully you've already like tried all the things and figured out together that it's not going to be a great fit. Other things that you can do is all of our other classes do not have the like stipulations that Flying Trapeze has. So you can suggest trying out other classes, things like that, just to make sure that you all know, which I know you do, we are not going to talk about their weight ever. I know that I have no way to tell how, I am not a good judge at how much somebody weighs. I don't know if that's a secret skill that you all have, but I don't have it. So there's no reason for you to ever have talked about their weight or brought in their weight into this conversation. Like at this point, they've already like done their hanging bar tests. They've done like some other things to get them ready, and all of those things have deemed that they aren't ready to do flying trapeze. If it becomes a really, really big problem, you can always throw you can always throw me under the bus, or well, I can't speak for Kirsten, but you can throw me under the bus and say, I'm sorry, I don't have the actual like authority to be able to bypass this system. If you have major complaints, like send an email to the office and they can help sort things out. But I don't want to put anybody in a really terrible situation with angry people.
And that's true. You don't get to bypass it.
I mean, with other things too, you can always throw me under the bus. Like, it doesn't have to be this particular situation. You can. You're like, yeah, I do it all the time.
They're part of the group, and we ask them not to participate, and their principal says they like to leave. Do they get refunded?
No, they do not. But again, if that's a concern for them, you can say this is the policy that I have to enforce, and if you have questions or concerns about it, here's what you can do. And then those friends could choose to leave or to stay. But yeah, and this applies if you're having a conversation because the student was not able, it was deemed like during ground school that they are not able to participate, or if you have tried all of the modifications and all of the strategies to keep them safe in the air and you like truly do not think that you can after all of that has been tried and considered. So that applies to either of those situations that you would say, like, I'm sorry, but I don't think that a flying trapeze class is for you. And even if they've taken 2 turns, they can still get a refund if we decide, like, we can't let you finish this class. Which, again, like, I can't imagine what situation that is, but, like,
Yeah.
It would be very uncommon.
I haven't experienced it, but maybe y'all have. Okay.
I've had students do 2 or 3 turns and then decide on their own behalf that trapeze is not
Oh,
for them.
that's a whole nother story.
That's different.
Yeah. Let them sit, take their bet off and watch class.
I mean,
Yeah.
no.
They don't get a refund
No,
if
because
it's their
they made that choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can always say, like, if you want to take a turn later in class, you're welcome to.
They checked
So
off
they're
their
still-
bucket list item.
Yeah. Or maybe some people are just like, that's all I wanted. Yeah, Lindsay.
I'm actually just having this one last question. What if someone openly acknowledges that they weigh way more than 220, but it's their second class and the previous team lead let them fly, but you don't feel comfortable? How do you approach that?
Great question. So first of all, a lot of the new structure that we've put into place is hopefully avoiding that, because it's not the team lead's responsibility to know what anyone weighs. They're signing on the waiver that they do not weigh more than that.
I mean, they openly
And they're also having to acknowledge during ground school that they don't weigh more than that. So we're adding additional steps to hopefully not get to that point first. Nothing's foolproof, so, like, I can't guarantee that you will not get to that point. But first of all, I think is likely to happen less, and that's part of the intention behind what we're doing. But at that point, if someone is over the weight limit, they are not allowed to fly. So, like, if they say to you or any other staff member that they are over the weight limit, they are not allowed to fly, and it doesn't matter what has happened in the past.
It doesn't matter if they caught a set trick and it was great and everything was fine. They have videos.
Yeah,
You still can't fly.
correct.
It's actually not. That's why I'm asking.
Yes. And I think that our previous system, I do not think was ideal to avoid that, to be honest with you. Like, I think it put there was too much opportunity for bias, and it put too much responsibility on people who, like Rachel was saying, like, I don't work at a carnival and guess people's weights. Like, I that's not a part of circus school. I don't know how to do that. So it's not really reasonable for us to ask you to look at someone and know how much they weigh. So we're making it their responsibility to, written and verbally, acknowledge that they are not over that weight limit. And there are some people who, honestly, like, maybe they don't know that they weigh 222 pounds because they don't weigh themselves regularly, and they might, like, honestly, mistakenly participate. So it's not always people, like, trying to get around the system. But again, our intention also is that you are capable of pulling lines with modifications for someone who is over 220 pounds. It's not like if someone's 221 pounds, automatically they'll get injured, right? So there's a little bit of wiggle room built into the system so that if someone is incorrect or if they lie, because someone might, then that's built into the system. But I would encourage you then, if you get someone even who's done things before, you also can set boundaries of what you are comfortable pulling for them while doing. It doesn't have to be the exact same things that they've done before. And you can say, before I want you to turn upside down, here's what I want to see. Or we're not going to work on that trick today, but here's an alternative.
Even if they weigh 285. Like, at that point, if they say how much they weigh and way over the weight limit, I can still say,
Oh,
great, then no, that's not.
correct. If they tell you or another staff member that they are over the weight limit, then they are not allowed to participate. And you can send them to the desk and say that is not,
And they still get refunded.
correct. Yes. They shouldn't get to that point because they had so many opportunities not to, but yes. If you know for sure they're over the weight limit, then you just say, I'm sorry, you can't participate because here's the rule.
But you should do so gently, nicely.
True. In general, this type of stuff might bring up difficult conversations, and also there are difficult conversations all the time that we have to have, right? Because again, flying trapeze is an emotionally charged experience. So that kind of segues into a good point that there's no situation where you should or need to proactively discuss anyone's body or your own body publicly in class. So I'm going to ask that you do not do that. even if it's positive, because that just sets the tone of this is not a topic of conversation. But what's different is if someone brings up a question or comment to you about their body, you don't have to say like, oh, I'm not allowed to talk about that. You know, you can, if they have brought it up, you can engage in that conversation to whatever extent you're comfortable. And it may not be their weight, but it might be like, is it hard for me to get my legs under the bar because of my stomach? Like, I don't know what their question might be, but if they specifically bring up a question or comment where they would like to engage in a conversation that is related to characteristics of their body, you can engage in that conversation. But we don't want to create a class environment where a student you're talking to or any students around hear you saying anything about their body or even saying anything about your own body, because that just sets the tone of that being something that we're evaluating as part of what we're doing. Did you have a follow-up question on that, Lindsay?
I'm a little bit confused by the language of, because what we're doing is a very physical thing and you use your body to do it, and I'm sort of confused about where the line, where you want the thing to be, of what we can do.
Yes. Good question. In general, I would say the size or shape of someone's body doesn't need to be discussed.
So, like for example, when I teach beats, it's a very specific muscle that I don't want them to use their hip flexors. Say that I want them to use their muscle like right below their chest. So
Yeah.
if I'm wearing something baggy, I will take it off so they can see me point to the mirror.
Uh-huh.
See that portion of my body, and I will pull it out and say, "Watch this part of my body. Notice how the hip flexors don't move."
Yes.
Is that okay? Using
Yes.
your body like
Good.
that?
Good question. That is, yes. Using your body as a visual is totally fine. What I would try to avoid is any comment again about like characteristics of your body, and I guess characteristics might be a little bit too vague. Size or shape of your body.
Okay. So pointing out muscles to use, like on
Yeah.
help, like if they don't know what you're talking about, to
Uh-huh.
show them.
Yeah.
Something like that is fine.
Yes.
What if they ask, like, where does the bar go, or whatever, balance position or whatever? Can you say, well, honestly, it depends on everyone's different proportions. Like for
Yes.
front support position,
Uh-huh.
it's really different depending on what your proportions are, just height length.
Yeah.
So wherever it feels comfortable, that works for you. Are we allowed to talk
Yes.
about that and say those words?
Yes. Also good question. Yes, you can give general commentary about the ways that the shapes of bodies might impact what's happening, if that makes sense. But we don't want to specifically say like, well, you have really long legs, so your bar is probably going to have to go lower down on your hips. But to say it varies person to person based on where their center of balance is on their body is totally fine. Does that make sense?
So I can't say, like, for example, I have a long torso and shorter legs, so my back balance is here, and other people's might be like, I can't say that.
I think it would be sufficient to say that it's, to keep it more vague, that it's different on everyone's body. Or even like some people it might be here and some people it might be like this is the range of where it might be, or something like that.
So, just like, when I say, like, let's try a hot style eating, I would personally hot style eating, so quickly on is doing like, based on like where, my flexibility and, how my body responds to going under the bar, I prefer to do a hot style eating. Because people are like, well, why do I need to do it?
Mm-hmm.
There could be 16 different reasons, so like, using me as like I'm a human who does this all the time and still prefers to do it this way because that's the way I'm, like, it's bendier for me to do that.
Yeah, I think saying you prefer it or it works better for you is totally fine. I think like the version of that I would avoid is because I have really thick thighs, this is the way I have to do it. Right? Does that make sense? The difference there? Yeah. And again, I usually will use like that more vague wording if I'm telling someone that we're going to learn a new style of knee hang. I'll say like this style tends to work better for some folks because of the dimensions of how their body is structured, or I don't know what exact words I use, but yeah. And I would totally think it was fine if I said, yeah, if it's a general comment about the variety of body shapes that exists in the world, that is something that is totally reasonable. If it is a comment about a specific body that exists, like in the general space you're in, then we're going to try to avoid that. Anything else to add to that part, Rachel?
Mm-mm.
Okay. The only other quick topic is communicating with other instructors. And in general, you may have board workers or catchers who bring up concerns. So trying to be equipped for that. One strategy, like we said earlier, is maybe to modify to help them feel more comfortable. But I think also encouraging them or giving them pointers, which we're going to bring up in the upcoming trainings. Like board workers will have specific tools that they can use. And so maybe even like going back to that and saying, hey, do you remember this part of the board worker training? That might help you in this situation. But just because that's something, again, none of this comes up that often, but sometimes other staff members might feel uncomfortable and you might be the support person for that experience for them. And also a small note is that we're asking catchers now to, number one, announce as part of the opening of ground school that we have a weight limit and that they should come and talk to that person, talk to the catcher afterwards, if that applies to them. And number two, ask them to hang and make sure that they're able to for the 15 seconds. So if catchers just recognize that after ground school, there might be a time when the catcher needs to come and brief you about what happened at ground school. So kind of making space for that.
At that point, is it the catcher's job to tell the team lead about the issue and the team lead handles speaking about a class?
No, the catcher will just tell them, but there is a slight possibility that it might be more complicated and they'll want to talk to someone else. And again, you can't say much more than the catcher can, honestly, but and then you'll also need to know, just because you need to know who's in class and who's not. If any of this is a skill that you would like more practice on, all of this is available like in training, hands-on, because this was more of a discussion format. So if it's something that you want more practice or more guidance on, training is a great time for that. Cool. Anything else before we go through questions? Okay, great. I'm going to stick around over here while Rachel goes over to training. And if you have more questions or like clarifications, discussion points, I'm happy to stay and talk through that as long as you want. I would suggest you either go or watch it on video so that you have that context. Yeah, again. Yeah, the board training will be a little bit more hands-on, or at least demonstration, because it's going to be like specific things you can do on the board with a student that might be helpful and might not be the things that people go over when they initially become a board worker, and so some people might not know that there are options. And then the catcher training is actually pretty straightforward. It's like a longer version of what I just said, the changes to how ground school is going to be done.
Can you just remind me what the order of operations is for when the hanging test will happen?
Yes. Yeah, I can remind you, but also I'm not sure that I've told you, so you didn't forget. So what we're going to incorporate into ground school is a specific opening piece that includes telling people that there's a weight limit and that they should talk to someone if that applies to them, and asking them with specific wording that is legally approved whether they have any medical considerations, injuries that might impact their experience. So instead of relying on catchers to say those things on their own, which we've been doing, we're going to have a more scripted version so that we make sure that we have given people the same information, that it's happening like really consistently. Yeah, it's going to be like a little laminated script that you can have. And then, obviously, I laminate everything I can. And then we're including as part of a hands-on part of ground school where we're going to ask people to hang from the bar, both so that we can make sure that they are able to, and also because we are explaining to them what a proper hanging position is, and we want them to be able to experience that before they've just jumped off a board and tried to do it.
So that is after belts go on and the whole spiel, and we're teaching them about what to do, that
It can be at any point, actually, during your ground school. So like some catchers choose to have everyone lean out for their takeoff. I would say it's the same as that. It's like a hands-on drill for one part of their turn that we're asking them to do as part of their ground school. Yes, which is why we're making it a skill enforcing drill rather than just a test of what they can do. And we will encourage the catchers not to immediately like point at the people who cannot do it, but have a quiet conversation afterwards.
are we making them aware that it's a 15-second mandatory, or are we just saying
Yeah. Well, number one, if they read their email, they are aware, but you know how that is. So yes, that would be part of the introduction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also, catchers can choose how they want to do it, but you could have more than one person doing it at once, which I think can mitigate some of the like everyone's watching me situation. Using those 2 pull-up bars or setting up more than one static trapeze. And the reason that we're having everyone do it is because I think the only other way to do it is that we like somehow evaluate who we feel concerned about and they have to do it, which is bias, and so it's not going to work.
And it's made perfectly clear at some point that they can be both under the weight policy that they said they were and removed from the class for the inability to hang.
Yes. That actually already is a policy, but we just don't have a like specific way that we're testing it. But it should apply to everyone.
So theoretically, there could be a birthday party, person not able to hang the bar. And therefore we have to sit there and watch their friends fly for 2 hours.
Theoretically, that is possible. Any other questions or topics you want more information about? Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys for being here and for working with us on